Lily. Welcome back to my channel, and a special welcome to all the new subscribers. It's quite amazing. I passed 100 subscribers, which I never thought would happen. So thank you very much for all your support and for all your lovely comments and things. It's been really nice. And today I'm going to be doing my August wrap up. I read 5 books in August and I rated all of them 4 stars, so it was a pretty good month. I didn't read as many as I normally would, I think, because I normally read on the train, on my commute to work, and I work in a school, so August has been my month off and I haven't been on any trains, so my reading has kind of been more my own motivation, which hasn't always gone so well. The first book that I read in August was Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebago. This is a book that was shortlisted for the Bailey's Women's Prize for Fiction. It was a book that I've heard quite a lot about on BookTube, and I had a good idea about what it was about and how good it was. There's been a lot of praise about this book. This book is about a woman called Yoshide, who she's trying to have a baby with her husband, but it's not working. And her husband's family are putting a lot of pressure on her to have a child, and the longer it goes on that she is unable to have a child, the more they are suggesting that her husband takes a second wife so he can have children through her instead. I love the characters, I found it really engaging. I think it took me about 2 days to read. This was the book that I read the fastest this month, I think. But what stopped it from being a 5-star book for me was I think that so much of this book is summarised and it feels a lot like telling more than showing. And there were a lot of rather ambiguous time jumps where I couldn't really tell how much time had actually passed. And in the second half of the book especially, there are other characters who I found it incredibly hard to figure out how old they were because it kept jumping. There was also a disease mentioned later in the book several times that becomes quite important, and there was no explanation at all about what this disease was. And I was in a Welsh valley with 0 signal, so I had no way to Google it, which was quite interesting because I was like, okay, I'll just carry on. It would have been really helpful, I think, to have at least had some brief summary about what that disease actually was and what it meant. But yeah, I still found it a really, really enjoyable book. It is quite an emotional book, very personal. It's very centred around family and the breakdown of a marriage. There is just so much in this book. It's so very vibrant and very it was a wonderful read, and I really love how the ending kind of pulled everything together, and it was a comfortable ending. It was a satisfying ending. So I really love this book, and yeah, 4 stars. The second book that I read in August was Timman by Sarah Winman. And Sarah Winman is, I think, one of my favourite authors. I read both of her previous 2 books when they came out, and her writing is so very vivid and very sensory and beautiful, and despite the flaws in her books, I've always loved her books. So I had really, really high expectations of Timman, especially because of all the positive reviews going around YouTube. The first half of the book is told from Ellis's point of view. The second half of the book is through Michael's point of view. And the first half is in 3rd person. It was very kind of dreamy and lonely, and there was a lot of emotion, and it's very beautifully written. And I love the way that Sarah Winman jumps to and from the past. I think sometimes it didn't work as well as it could have done, but she does that through quite a lot of her other writing as well. And it just is very fluid and very natural a lot of the time. And Ellis is an intriguing character. He's not really very happy in his life. We know right from the start that his wife is now dead at this point, so there's a lot in there about grief and grief processing and trying to move on with your life. The second half of the book, through Michael's point of view, is written in a diary format, detailing 6 years where he and Ellis were not in contact. I really did enjoy this book. I thought it was very beautifully written. It had a very strong themes, and there's clearly a lot of love and research gone into this book, but I didn't love it as much as I loved her other books for some reason, and it was almost just because it didn't feel like it went anywhere. It dipped into the past, but the actual present in which Ellis lives didn't really go anywhere. And it might be just me, I maybe should read it again and give it another go, but this, I was so expecting it to be a 5-star book. I think that Just one little pinch of disappointment brought it down for me. But I really love Sarah Winman. I recommend all of her books. She's a brilliant writer. And the third book that I read this month is To Hear the Skylark Song, a memoir by Hugh Lewis. And this was a book I picked up while I was on my scout camp. Scouts, we visited a coal mine called Big Pit, and it was probably one of the most strangest, most moving experiences I think of my life. I definitely didn't go down that mine expecting to be moved in such a way. But the guy who was giving us a tour, he was a man who had actually worked in the mine as a young man when it had still been open, and he told us so many stories, and he was so full of pride and love, and he really, really loves that mine. But it kind of astounded me. I feel like I'd gone in with this false understanding that working in a coal mine was not a great experience. So one of the stories that the guide told us was about a town not too far away from where we were called Aberfan, where in 1966 a colliery waste slag heap, which is kind of like an artificial mountain I guess, collapsed onto a school and killed nearly a whole generation of children. And it was such a horrible, horrible story, and this book I was recommended because it's written by a man who grew up in the aftermath. He was actually 3 years old when that accident happened. His sister went out to school that morning, I think must have been running a little bit late, and she came back and said that her best friend had died, and that's where this memoir takes off. And I really did expect it to be quite a difficult and very emotional read because of the subject matter, but really it's just a memoir like any other. It's about childhood with all the same kind of crazy fun stuff that kids did in the 60s and 70s. There was so much in here that I recognised from my own childhood as well, which I think is quite extraordinary considering he grew up in the late 60s and early 70s and I grew up in the 90s. But there was so much that was really familiar and just very simple day-to-day stuff, like put lumps of coal on the coal fire and freezing beds and hot water bottles. And after that first chapter about the colliery disaster, it doesn't really go into much more detail about what happened. It's really just about how childhood continued after that, and it's just a really, really beautiful memoir. He's really, really beautiful writing. He's very descriptive and sensory, and the way he tells stories is just so wonderful. It's only got one review on Goodreads at the moment. My review's a little bit lonely, so if you do enjoy memoirs, I really, really recommend this one. It's not as sad and difficult as the blurb says it is. The fourth book that I read in August was Some Like Pilgrims by Jenni Fagan. But this book, I picked it up because it sounded a lot like Station 11, which I read last year, and it was one of my favourite reads of the year. I really, really loved it. This book is about a man called Dylan who has grown up in a vintage cinema with his grandmother and his mother, who are both quite eccentric and brilliant characters. And they have died right just before the beginning of this novel, and Dylan has been left a caravan in Scotland, and he decides he's going to go live in this caravan in Scotland. But the problem is the apocalypse is kind of happening at the same time, and it's a very kind of realistic approach, I think, to the apocalypse. Basically what it is the global warming has melted the ice caps to a point where too much cold water has gone into the sea, and it's now causing a global freeze. And the beginning of this novel is kind of hailing this massive deep freeze winter. So Dylan heads to this caravan site, and when he arrives he meets a little girl called Stella, and Stella is brilliant. She's the other point of view in this book. Stella is unfortunately not mentioned at all in the blurb, which I think is quite a disservice. She actually felt more like the main character than Dylan did, and Stella is a trans girl, so she's having a lot of difficulties with friends and school. She's only 12 years old, so she's still quite confused about herself and her identity, and she's worrying about puberty and things like that. And Stella is a fantastic character. She was my favourite thing in this whole book. Like, her and Dylan's dialogue is brilliant. Her mum is a survivalist. It was a really wonderful book. I could have read a book 3 times this size, I think. And just the characters talking to each other and having conversations and stargazing and all these kind of silly things. It was just wonderful. It's really, really well written. The thing that dropped this down for being a 5-star book was that it just didn't have a plot at all. Dylan arrives at the caravan site, and that's kind of all that happens. There is an incident with Stella that happens about halfway through the book, but every time something almost happens, there's this big massive time skip, so we don't actually see what happens, and that just felt a bit lazy to me. I think there were so many things that could have happened and didn't. And then I think the penultimate chapter, I was reading it thinking, oh, this is a lovely way to end, oh, it's so wonderful, and then the last chapter just kind of ruined it, and it felt really, really unnecessary. I really don't like ambiguous endings, especially like this, and especially in a book where like nothing happens anyway, so why did you have to have something happen right at the end and then us not even really know if something happened? So like, oh, it's really kind of frustrating. Some really cool natural phenomenon. There was some really cool natural phenomenons that happened in this book. One of them that I really liked was the parhelia, which is where ice crystals form in the air and kind of create a big ring around the sun, and there's light refractions off either side, so it looks like there are 3 suns. And I did some googling and found a really, really cool picture, which I'll stick up here somewhere, that kind of made me think a lot about this cover. And if you look at the whole thing, it's this giant sun, and it's really cool. I was like, whoa, this cover makes so much sense to me now, because before I just thought it was really cool design, but actually there's been a lot of thought gone into it, and I really, really liked that, and it reminded me a lot of this painting. So kudos to the cover designer. But yeah, so this one was 4 stars. I really loved it. I think if you liked Station 11, you will definitely like this. And the last book that I read in August was Inducting Wood by Emma Carroll. I read several of Emma Carroll's other books, and I've loved all of the ones that I've read so far. I think she's a brilliant writer. She pitches it right, just right for children, and there's a lot of complexity to her books, I find. And this one I was quite looking forward to because in the blurb it says it's quite linked to World War I, which is one of my kind of interest areas. This book wasn't quite what it had been sold as, I think. It's about a girl called Alice who's in contemporary time, and her little brother is having a heart transplant. So they're quite worried about whether he will survive or not, and kind of ethical questions about it. But while her mum and her brother are in the hospital, Alice has nowhere to go, so she's sent to live with her estranged grandmother, who is quite a character, I think. And Alice's grandmother lives in this cottage that is surrounded by a wood. The problem is the trees are too close to the house. They're like damaging the foundations and the walls and things. So her grandmother just wants to get rid of all of the woods. A lot of the local people really disagree with her, so there's a whole big fight about the woods. But while Alice is living there with her grandmother, she meets a girl in these woods called Flo, who she believes there are fairies in these woods. And I love that kind of blend of magical realism, and that was really beautiful, and a lot of the ecological questions were really well addressed, I think. The thing that didn't really work for me very well was that with each chapter there was also an accompanying letter by a girl who was writing to her brother just after the war. I think there was a certain revelation about 2/3 of the way through, and then we think, actually, we didn't need any of that plot at all. The whole World War I thing could have been totally taken out. It didn't feel natural, and the character arcs and things like that, and the plot was a lot more about Alice and her family and them figuring their stuff out, rather than this other alternate family in the past. I don't know. I felt like, yeah, it could have been a bit more powerful of a story if she just left that out and brought in more to do with the family. There's a certain family member who could have taken that role of this person who was writing instead. And that sounds mad, but I'm trying not to spoil it, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was still very enjoyable. I would definitely give this to my little sister when she's a bit older, and it's typical Emma Carroll, really. It's just beautiful. And look, the cover is lovely. Those were all the books that I read in August. They were all 4-star books, so I had a brilliant month, I think. September, I'm hoping I will read more than I did in August, because I start work on Monday again, so I've got that commute every day. But let me know what you've been reading in August, and whether you've read any of these books, what you think of them. If you've read Pax, will I love it? I think I will. I think I am. I think I do love it. Yes, I'm halfway through and I love it. Thank you for watching. I hope you've all had a lovely summer and you're looking forward to autumn. So happy reading. Bye! And one of the stories he told... Hello? You look lovely.
Thanks. I feel like a 1960s housewife.
You look like a 1960s housewife, I must say. Yeah, just dump it there.
Illuminati's real! No!